when I first discovered this, I realized that this had been happening all my life, that God had encountered me in such a way that revealed something, it totally changed my thinking, or began to change my thinking, and then everything was like, wow, life is different. Now, my angel that is associated with my position in heaven, my throne, was facilitating this taking place by coordinating with the 12 chancellors, my chancellors, coordinating with them to facilitate cycles of change in my life. And so I went through many cycles of these things without me really understanding the process. I read a book, opened up my eyes to something of God totally different, really changed my thinking, then everything focused outworking that. And I went through that cycle many times. Baptism of the Spirit was one cycle. Probably the first cycle I remember going through was when I read Watchman Nee's book about the normal Christian life. And that was like my Christian life as a teenager was anything but normal based on what that book said. But that totally transformed my thinking to thinking, I'm living an abnormal Christian life. Therefore, I want normality. And therefore, I began to see that my life was not dictated to by my behavior or everything else. So everything changed from the perspective of that in quite a profound way. Same with baptism of the Spirit. Read a book, 9 o'clock in the morning. That opened my eyes to something, took me on a cycle, and I went through many cycles like that. Often God used books because he couldn't get my attention much other way. In the end day, I wasn't able to hear his voice. I wasn't functioning in this relationship of intimacy. So from that perspective, he used what he could to change and put me on these cycles. Now, that I realized was not just all of us are individually going through those cycles, but also there are larger cycles that affect larger groups of people or cultures of people that are designed to move us all into an awakening so that we can corporately engage the mind of Christ. We become a engaged agreement, if you like, with God. That happens. And in history, you can see the great awakenings take place when people begin to come into agreement. Now, in the inner wheel of the wheels within the wheels within the wheels, God spoke to me about there are 12 ages of man that were designed for stages of ascension. And there were ambassadors of those ages that were like the 12 chancellors who were taking what God's desire was for our transformation, our increase in ascension in sonship, and were responsible for helping us outwork that in our lives. So this isn't really talking about ages as in periods of time in the same way as we think about, the Neolithic age or the Bronze Age or the Iron Age or anything else. This is really talking about us coming into an ascended state of maturity. And I know people talk about ages today in the church age and the kingdom age and the age of Melchizedek, and they have all these sort of, I think, defining periods, which really are not real periods of time. But God does something and it seems like, oh, we've changed the age, but really what's happening is we're becoming mature and we're seeing things from a different perspective. And those ages are related to our maturity. We're effectively so you could think of it as we started off as babies, we became toddlers, then we became infants, then became juniors, and then we became teenagers, and then we became adults. It's a sort of, but there are 12 ages, 12 stages of our maturation, if you like, growth in sonship that give us access to the firestones of God, which are linked to these ages. So the firestones are encounters that bring revelation, and each stone is a step of maturity in various different levels. And I believe there are 12 encounters, because I first encountered 9 stones, But then God showed me that we were to bring 3 more stones. So the 9 stones reflected the 9 stones that were there, and it talks about in the firestones were reflected on Lucifer's body. Hence, he was there to reflect God's glory as he made us in his image and likeness, so we could begin to be transformed into that likeness through the light that was reflected. And each one of those would have been one of the 9 firestones. But the encounters on the firestones that I've had, God then said, you are to become, in our image and likeness. Therefore, there are 3 stones that are going to be reflecting man's ascension. So you get the 12 stones on the high priest breastplate are reflections of the government of God. And those 12 stones are also seen in the New Jerusalem, in the foundations and the walls, which are built on 12 levels, if you like, of revelation or truth or knowledge or wisdom, different ways of looking at it or perspectives that you're seeing. So what I sort of discovered in the journey, and God talked to me about a little bit, is as we mature and we've come into the fullness of the 9, which is 3 of God, 3 times 3, 3 Spirit, 3 Father, 3 Son, then we will add our 3 of sonship to those 3, and our government is the fullness of God, 9 plus our 3, hence 12. So that was sort of part of this process of growth and maturity, and I realized that there were 12 engagements with the firestones. So that meant 12 ages, if you like, of engaging the firestones. Not just there would be 12 stones, but there were 12 within that 12. So for each 12 of a period of maturity or an age of our ascension, there were 12 stones within the 12. You see what I mean? So each stone of the firestones, there were 12 encounters that each of us would have in our lives to bring us into that place of maturity. And I think that's really what the 12 ages of man were about. Not talking about 12 ages in history, but 12 stages of maturity that come into the fullness of sonship. And the Father said, when you've ascended the 12 steps, you will become an ascended father. And I think this is future, in which we will then take on the creative role as a father in the way that God intends that to be. And I wouldn't want for us to try and figure that out or work that out now, what it might mean. But I do believe it is something to do with a co-creating capacity that we have for future increase in God's government and peace. So that's how I would sort of perceive it to be. If you enjoy these videos, would you please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe? It really does help. Thank you very much.